Welcome to our March Planet Possible MiniPod. I'm Niki Roach, and this is a monthly update where we react to current events in water, climate and nature. And it's a mini-pod because it'll only take about 15 minutes of your time, and it means you get a Planet Possible episode every 2 weeks. So each mini-pod, I'm joined by an environmental expert, and we explore 3 issues that are making the headlines, keeping you up to date with what's happening around the world and where my guest sees exciting possibilities. So this mini-pod, my guest is the Regional Director for the South West of England for Natural England, with a background in zoology and ecology both in the UK and overseas, Dave Slater. And we'll be talking about whether beavers are a force for good after the news that the UK government has announced its commitment to reintroducing beavers into the wild, creation of the new Western Forest, the first new national forest in 30 years, and how we ensure that nature has an enduring impact and changes, like the ones I've just mentioned, aren't forced on people. So we're focusing on nature in this mini-pod, and there have been a lot of developments in this space. And while we might think of England as a green and pleasant land, we've seen species decline by almost 20% since the 1970s, 1 in 6 species threatened with extinction. So against that background, I am really looking forward to hearing your views. So let's talk about the news that the UK government's recently announced that beavers, which have previously been managed in enclosures, will be able to be released into the wild. Tell me more, Dave.
As someone with a background in wildlife conservation, I'm incredibly excited about beavers. At the same time, I understand why people have concerns about releasing them into the wild. Beavers have not been common in our countryside for a long time. There's been an increase in releases outside the law for the last few years. And, obviously it can be quite a contentious issue. I am convinced from the evidence that I've seen that beavers are overall a force for good. We live in times where a lot of our rivers have been sort of overmanaged. We have flooding issues, impacts of climate change, water quality issues. Now, beavers have a potential role in tackling all those things. And the evidence base is growing and growing that actually, on the whole, they do slow the flow of rivers. They do retain water in times of drought. And they do sort of prevent flooding incidents and improve water quality. However, if I was a farmer and I've adapted my farming system to try to have a viable system in difficult times, when they're trying to make a living and suddenly beavers appear, I understand completely why they would be concerned. And I think the Natural England licensing system is actually designed to ensure that beaver introductions are successful. They are likely to have a good environmental impact, but at the same time, they account for any potential impacts on things like local agriculture.
When beavers are in enclosures, there's a degree of management. We kind of know roughly how many there are and so on. Once they're reintroduced into the wild, what degree of control, if any, is there, and what kind of monitoring is happening around those sort of impacts that you've just talked about?
That's what the licensing system that we hold is actually for. So each license, it's a 10-year plan, which would include, how you're going to monitor and measure impacts. These are wild animals. Some of them will disperse and some of them will go quite long distances. There isn't a lot of evidence that is a problem, but yes, a degree of monitoring, a degree of making sure. We also issue guidance on how, land managers can mitigate any impacts of beavers. They can manage any sort of dams that are being recently established in places where they might become problematic. They can manage those without the need for additional license. So we hope, while accepting these are wild animals, and we want them to thrive in the countryside, there's enough in those plans just to maintain control and keep monitoring. And certainly during these early days of licensed beaver releases, we'll be keeping a real close eye on it and working with farmers.
And are you seeing any geographical hotspots? Are there particular areas of the country that you've seen more interest for this to happen? And are there particular areas of the country that it makes more sense for this kind of reintroduction to happen?
I live here on the south coast on the border of Dorset and Devon, and we have a very famous established beaver population on the River Otter here, and there's obviously been a lot of interest locally. I think Kent areas have really good established populations, but they are growing across Somerset, and beavers are sort of all over the country. I would sort of caution against the idea that beavers can work on their own. Where they are most successful and where projects most successful is where it's part of a coordinated approach. So I don't think there's a particular part of the country where that is. I think probably the factors for success are having landowners and land managers who are particularly committed to delivering more landscape scale management of their catchments. So beavers on their own will not solve the problems in our rivers, but they could be a really important factor. You know, the one I'm most close to and the one I take my kids down to see the beavers is on the River Otter here, the Lower Otter Restoration Project, Clinton Devon Estates. Now, Clinton Devon Estates are a wonderful and very progressive estate who want to leave the land in a better place than when they found it. Now, they are doing a whole range of initiatives on that river catchment, including the licensed release of beavers in partnership with the Devon Wildlife Trust. It's been really successful. They've also breached the sea defences and created a wonderful wetland estuary, which is now a National Nature Reserve, and they're currently applying for landscape recovery funding, which is our agri-environment scheme designed to bring farmers together. It's a hell of a lot of work on their part, a real commitment and financial commitment, as well as, reputational and other risks. So at the moment, beavers will flourish where we've got real commitment at a landscape scale, if that makes sense. And I think there are other examples around the country where that is happening. All those things in combination will lead to much improved river catchments.
We did a really lovely podcast a couple of seasons ago. I'll pop a link in the show notes, where we went down to Spain's Hall, North Essex, and amongst other things saw the beavers, obviously in closures at that point, but seeing the work they were doing around holding the water back in the landscape, reducing flood risk, reducing the need for additional irrigation. It was really interesting. So absolutely, I think they're not the solution by themselves, but a more integrated approach is needed. Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. So I wanted to think about the news today that came out that we are creating the first new forest in 30 years. So 20 million trees will be planted, 2,500 hectares of new woodland down in your neck of the woods in the southwest, so the Western Forest. And we have a legally binding target in the UK of achieving 16.5% woodland cover by 2050. So when I read that number, that didn't mean a lot to me. So I had a look at the Forestry Commission research that shows currently we're at 13%. Doesn't feel that far away, but actually Scotland is doing the lion's share of the work there. They're at nearly 20%. And so across England, it's as low as 10% of the total land area that's woodland and 9% in Northern Ireland. So the good news is, from the late 90s to now, we've seen a 12% increase in woodland. But I'm really interested to hear your thoughts, because this forest is obviously new forest, but also connecting existing woodlands around the Cotswolds, Somerset, Gloucestershire. There's some public funding going in. There's 7.5 million going in from the government, but also a huge challenge, I think, to bring private finance in. And in our February Planet Possible, we talked to Bevis Watts and Ed Dick all about green finance and nature markets and how we can combine public and private funding for these kind of big projects. And I was really interested, particularly to see like the pine marten might be coming back into that part of the world. There's some amazing fungi, the like of which I can't pronounce some of the names, but included the tiered tuth fungus. You can tell I'm from Birmingham because that's how I pronounce the word tuth. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on it, Dave, because obviously Natural England have been playing a bit of a role in the creation of this brand new forest. So yeah, tell me more.
It's really exciting. It's at a scale which is likely to be sort of usable for a nature investment. And I think we've talked about nature investment and green finance for a long time. There's actually very little investment for nature coming through. And I think one of the problems is that we don't have projects of sufficient scale to attract investors. The West of England Combined Authority and the partners there are very progressive. They are looking at this, and I think it's a real hotbed of potential for really getting green finance going in an area.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops. So there's a kind of link here. So for your What's Possible item, you wanted to talk about something that's really important to you. And given that we just talked about the reintroduction of beavers and the Western Forest, this kind of feels really pertinent. And that's about when you change the natural environment, how you consider the needs of local communities and you avoid nature being forced upon people. Your words, fascinated to hear more. So what are your reflections, Dave?
Yeah, it's quite a strong phrase, that, isn't it? And what I mean by that is that I think back in the day where I was a local advisor in the Yorkshire Dales, I remember designing and feeling really proud of nature conservation projects that we implemented there to sort of, increase the amount of wading birds and woodland and hay meadows and what have you. But I also went back recently and a lot of that work has become intensive farmland again, and it's just gone back. And I think probably reflecting on that, it's because we never really asked the communities what they wanted in terms of their natural environment, and I do think often involving people and consulting the whole range of people in a place is often considered as a bit of an add-on, but I actually think it's actually essential for an enduring success. Us in the environment sector have got to be prepared to compromise to meet communities' needs in order to really have projects that endure beyond that short-term initial funding that often is the feature of our sector.
Where have you seen it done really well, Dave?
I think involving local communities sort of applies equally as if you're in West Cornwall as in the south of Bristol, and I've been involved in projects in both those areas. We have been involved for a while in an area called West Penwith in Cornwall. That area was designated as a site of special scientific interest, and it was hugely divisive and controversial in that community. And we learned a lot from that. Over the last year and a half, 2 years, Cornwall Wildlife Trust, Natural England and other partners have really had big conversations with those local communities, asking those farmers, many multi-generational farmers, what it is they want from their landscape. And they are proud of their cultural traditions. They identify with a certain kind of landscape. And by that, listening to them, we're able to start planning for the future in a way that sort of really embeds that local culture and community and will deliver great outcomes for nature and for water quality, but is more likely to endure and be embraced by those local communities. And that's got to be a blueprint for working everywhere. I mean, there are a lot of projects out there that are thinking like this and doing great work. I suppose a couple of things I think probably are barriers to really making those a success is that I think sometimes the evidence that we provide and the way we articulate our evidence is quite difficult for local communities to really get their heads around. I think we could do a lot more around how we explain how a denuded local environment affects people's lives, provide those kinds of solutions. We could do more. I mean, I've been recently out and talking to colleagues in the Blackdown Hills National Landscape in a project called Connecting the Colne, which the area around there is prone to flooding. I used to live around there. It's a constant conversation in people's lives. They can't get to work. They can't get to school. You've got people out there isolated. That is what communities want to fix. At the same time, you've got a pinch point, probably one of the most important pinch points in the southwest for a railway line and roads. And the flooding is a huge cost for them. A Network Rail colleague I was talking to the other day said they get fined for every minute a train is delayed. So the idea of putting in a big nature-based solution, to use the jargon, or, creating habitats up and down that valley for relatively small cost, which will yield, great benefits to that community and save infrastructure, the hassle of delays, but also the huge costs attributed to those delays. That was done through the local National Landscape team there, going out and talking to people, talking to the range of stakeholders, finding out what drives people in that area. And as a result, they've got a solution there which is likely to endure.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I think none of us know the whole of the picture, do we? And actually, we talk a lot about catchment management and we talk about place-based approaches, all these kind of lovely little buzzwords. But actually, it is about understanding all of the layers and complexity as best you can and what's really important to people, isn't it? And then often you just present the evidence and you can find a way through, I think. But people are really tied to landscape. It's a really important part of our culture. I think I started this episode by saying, green and pleasant land, it feels built into us, I think, often, doesn't it, landscape? And it's only when you start to talk about changing it that you realise how important it is beyond just what it looks like. So yeah, really interesting. You've given me loads to think about, Dave. Thank you. And unfortunately, as ever with mini pods, they go so fast. So that is all we've got time for. But I hope it's given you something to think about in your world as well. Thank you for joining us on the mini pod. To make sure you never miss an episode, you can join our mailing list and subscribe to Planet Possible on your usual podcast player. We have got more fantastic guests and topics lined up for the rest of the year. And we're going to be talking all about rainwater harvesting in new housing developments in our next episode. So be sure to catch that. All that leaves me to say is a huge thank you to my superb guest, Dave Slater. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you, Niki.
Total pleasure. That's it, everyone. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you next time.